There's a broad consensus that leaders today are facing challenges of unprecedented scale and complexity. Climate chaos, the global pandemic is a perfect example. So the US military have coined the term VUCA based on what they're experiencing in an environment, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And maybe a good way to understand the difference between complicated and complex is the metaphor of a machine with an engineering kind of a background. We often look at the machine metaphor, where we have clearly defined inputs and outputs and a clear line of cause and effect that can be predicted and controlled. Whereas in complexity, we might look at the metaphor of the organism, where we have an ecosystem where there are emergent properties, feedback loops, and it adapts and self-organizes in unpredictable ways. Complexity is evolving faster than our dominant paradigms about leadership, and global CEOs have identified complexity as one of the primary issues of concern. So we're all facing this regularly, and unfortunately not many of us are very well equipped to deal with this gap between the complexity of what we can perceive and what we actually experience. And Robert Keegan, who is a developmental psychologist from Harvard, talks about when we experience the world as too complex, it's not actually just the complexity in the world, but it's the gap between what we can make sense of and the complexity that we're experiencing. And in line with this, actual and perceived complexity in projects has increased, and the proportion of work that organizations are delivering through projects is also increasing. And the ICCPM, the International Centre for Complex Project Management, has advanced leadership as a game changer in complex projects. But the capacity to navigate and respond to complexity with proficiency is quite rare. And Warren Bennis, the scholar, now deceased, has argued that we really need a great evolutionary leap in leadership, and one that has a focus of being highly collaborative and have a focus on understanding of self and relationships and others. So to bring it to life a little bit and make it relatable to imagine most of us, I thought I'd use a case study of what could be considered a complex project, and that is Grandma's 80th birthday party. And just to illustrate that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, there's still plenty of use for traditional project management methods and complexity. For the birthday party, say we've got catering, food, drinks, seating arrangements, all of those logistical things can be planned in advance using normal kind of methods. But then the people arrive and people create complexity. So you've got Uncle Henry, who's a Trump supporter, who loves to corner you and bend your ear about climate science. And you've got one side of the family that ranges from staunch conservatives to the right, and the other side who range from left-wing social justice types to wild hippies. And you know that any kind of issue that arises can really generate conflict and throw everything off course. And the only thing we're wanting to do is give Grandma a really good birthday. So can we manage these relational dynamics in the same way as we manage the logistics? Can we plan every interaction, schedule in how people meet with each other? We just can't do it. So we have to drop into an area of being in reciprocity with the complex system around us and being in relationship and being able to adapt and respond on the fly. The question was around what kind of capabilities do we need to succeed in a VUCA world? One of the first ones for me is to have an adaptive mindset. And this involves having cognitive flexibility and a capacity to adapt and respond to change and uncertainty and be agile and nimble about how we do that. So we know that we can't control the way that Auntie Elena and Auntie Martina will get on the wrong side of each other and kick off an argument that could derail the birthday party. But we can adapt and respond to their conversation and make a timely intervention that might diffuse the situation. Another critical capacity is perspective taking and being able to coordinate perspectives. So appreciating diverse perspectives and trying not to fall into the trap of either or thinking or win and lose thinking, but rather holding that ambiguity between them and having the capacity to find the both and to develop shared understanding and bring coherence to diverse groups of stakeholders who might have divergent agendas. So, for example, can I put myself in Uncle Henry's shoes when he talks to me about climate science, even though I might disagree with what he says? And can I hold that discomfort and try and see the world through his eyes? And even reach out to him and find ways where we have shared understanding and bring him along, be more of a positive influence. Self and social awareness is another critical capacity. More complex projects require enhanced soft skills and social and emotional intelligence. And some MBA programs and project literature are focusing on reflective learning increasingly. And this reframes the project practitioner away from the hard technical skills or the trained technician towards the project practitioner as a reflective practitioner, which is a paper that Lynn wrote, actually, which I highly recommend. So another critical capability is systems thinking and also contextual thinking. And when we are using systems thinking, instead of reducing systems down to the component parts, like we tend to do in projects when we build tasks and work breakdown structures and so forth, systems thinking seeks to understand the whole and see the relationship between the parts, and through that have a more deeper understanding of those component parts. And this reveals more holistic complexity dynamics, such as emergence and feedback loops in the system. And we can use that to sort of scan the system and look for threats that are emerging or opportunities that are emerging in the environment that are aligned with our goals. And there's also another side of systems thinking, which is the soft side, and that looks at the human system. And especially looking at the meaning that people make up around the project and how that is embedded in a cultural context. And a good example of how we would do that is a tool called soft systems methodology. And when we do that, we have to engage with a wide range of different stakeholders, get a really deep understanding of the different perspectives and meanings that people are constructing around the project. And there's a key differentiation here that this is a problem structuring technique rather than a problem solving technique. So when we have high degrees of complexity, old problem solving techniques you could use and not really be very effective. And you might have to use a problem structuring technique with soft systems methodology to really understand the context and get a richer understanding of what's happening, makes more sense of the ambiguity and uncertainty. And this idea of sense making is a critical tool in complexity, because we might have to make sense of things a bit more in a wicked problem or a complex project before we can really jump into a solutions mode. And once that context is better understood, then we can move problem solving. So the final one that I'll introduce is collaborative engagement. And this is about building relationships and developing a shared vision and understanding of the project. And when we do this in complexity, we might move from old ideas of having a defined scope from the beginning and delivering that to project success being something that's negotiated and changes and evolves throughout the project. And we have to negotiate that with key stakeholders and adapt and respond as the project evolves and changes, and set expectations, but at the same time keep an aligned goal. We need to rethink our ideas of leadership from top-down leadership to more shared and distributed forms of leadership. And this is quite prominent in the complexity literature, where they say leadership's too complex to be described as only the act of an individual, but rather it's the complex interplay of many forces, an emergent quality that arises in the interactive spaces between people. So this challenges our paradigms about power, from being something where we delegate to something where we set a few simple rules and guiding principles and a vision, and then allow the system to generate the particulars and to move in that direction. I'd like to introduce what I think is a superpower for reflective learning, a transformative learning tool called double loop inquiry. And this is a reflective practice that we use in the action, in the moment, on the job, to learn and develop as we're working in everyday life. And just to draw a distinction between single loop and double loop learning, we can challenge ourselves to hold ambiguity and conflicting perspectives, and to, for example, try and stand in the shoes of Uncle Henry and see the world through his eyes, even though it might really challenge our own worldview. So that's my argument, is that reflective practice is a critical tool for leaders to develop the edge of their current capacity in adapting and orchestrating a response to complexity.